Good afternoon. The time is 5:31 p.m. on December 20th, 2017, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Haywood, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Williams.
Present.
Ms. Carter.
Present.
Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson. Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
Present.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Present.
Dr. Woodruff.
Present.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones. Mr. Whedon.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor.
Present.
Ms. Rhodes.
Present.
Ms. Robinson.
Present.
Madam President, you have quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, you have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will now ask for yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is approved. Members, we have the minutes from our December 6th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing no changes, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will now ask for yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Good evening. My name is Karen Williams, Ward 7 Representative and President of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, December 20th public meeting. The State Board typically holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month here in the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. Beginning in November, the metro entrance closest to our meeting at Judiciary Square of 4th Street Northwest is closed for an estimated 10 months for escalator repair. The F Street exit of the Judiciary Square station is still open. If you plan to visit the State Board offices or attend one of our meetings, please plan accordingly. Tonight's agenda includes 3 ceremonial resolutions honoring the achievements of district students and organizations. Part of the role of the State Board is to be the conduit from the community to the government. We are pleased to recognize the outstanding hard work of our honorees tonight. We will also be considering 2 resolutions that recommend direct action by our sister agencies in the government. One of the resolutions speaks to the recent reports of unfair and discriminatory practices related to grades in our district high schools. And I want to be very clear that the State Board takes this issue very seriously and is committed to making real and lasting changes to the system to ensure that every student is confident in their diploma. The second resolution is considered here tonight requests a change in the reporting of students living in poverty. Across the country, students are deemed to be living in poverty if they receive free or reduced price meals or farm. The problem is that many schools receive what is called community eligibility for farm, leading to less precise reporting, since not all students at a community eligible school are actually living in poverty. I want to thank Representative Rottenberg for her work on this issue and look forward to our discussion later in the meeting. The State Board will also be considering a report detailing the work since the board's establishment a decade ago in 2007. The State Board has much to be proud of in its first 10 years, and those accomplishments are highlighted in the report, but it also provides a preview of the board's future activities in 4 priority areas: implementing consistent and responsive education standards, expanding and deepening community involvement, conducting a comprehensive code and regulatory review, and continuing to refine its operations. I will now turn the floor over to our State Superintendent, Hansel Kong, for any opening statement she might have. Superintendent?
Thank you, President Williams. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hansel Kang, and I'm the State Superintendent of Education at OSSE. I wanted to take a moment here to acknowledge the deep concern we all have about allegations around graduation and attendance that were raised in a WAMU story about Ballou High School that raised questions about policy and practice in all of our DC high schools. As you know, the City Council held a hearing on this issue last Friday. As I stated at the hearing, OSSE's investigation into this matter is ongoing, and we are not able to speak to the findings until the investigation is complete. However, I wanted to state for the record this evening that I am deeply troubled by the allegations and take very seriously the need to investigate with urgency what may have happened. I know that our shared goal is to support our students and ensure that they are able to learn, achieve, and be prepared for college, career, and life opportunities. OSSE, with the support of a highly experienced vendor, is actively conducting one thorough investigation with 3 parts. First, an analysis of student-level attendance and graduation outcomes at public high schools in the district. Second, a review of the implementation of attendance, graduation, and credit recovery policies at DCPS high schools for 12th graders. And third, a review of the public charter school board's oversight of graduation policies for public charter high schools. OSSE looks forward to reviewing the findings of the investigation with you once it is public. We are committed to district-wide practices that will ensure our students have access to a high-quality and equitable education that prepares them for college, careers, and life opportunities. I also appreciate the board's attention to the definition of economically disadvantaged students and look forward to offering some contextual comments at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate your being here. The State Board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at SBOE@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have 4 witnesses. As I call your name, please come down to the table. Elizabeth Davis, unfortunately, could not be here tonight. Laura Fuchs. Eric Martell. Natasha Everett. You're the only one. You know the drill, do 3 minutes. You can begin whenever you're ready.
All right. Good evening. Thanks again for always allowing us to be here and testify publicly. So DC and our nation are at a watershed moment examining the awarding of diplomas. As has been brought to light repeatedly in front of this very body and nationwide by concerned stakeholders, there's intense pressure on schools to graduate students, even if they are not fully prepared for whatever the next steps may bring. Our Graduation Requirements Task Force was ostensibly set up to deal with this very issue, making sure our students are prepared for their futures when they leave DC public and charter schools. I'm here to say that I firmly oppose the idea that changing our graduation requirements will solve these issues, and instead believe that the current strawman might actually make matters even worse. If the current strawman were to be approved by the State Board, it would further be perpetuating the race to the bottom when it comes to our students' educations, sacrificing what limited resources we are currently giving them under the guise of choice. In the DCPS and charter high schools that serve our highest proportion of at-risk students, we routinely see funding that only supports the bare minimum of mandated courses. And if we are lucky, a select group of students may have a chance to experience an academy or specialty programming, often reserved for our best and brightest. At HD Woodson, we have enough money to provide for the bare minimum required to offer the courses required to graduate. Excuse me. We offer no foreign language above the 2nd year. We're limited to no elective art and music classes and a few social studies courses beyond the minimum required to graduate. If those requirements are lowered or condensed in any way, it will give DCPS license to reduce the already limited number of staffing we receive. In a city full of choice, the lack of effective oversight and the intense competition for students has led to a situation where LEAs and educators do whatever it takes to graduate as many students as possible in 4 years. If we lessen the requirements for what it takes to earn a diploma in this city, then we'll be pressuring schools to continue to limit student courses in order to graduate them more efficiently, and the students who are most at risk of failing will be limited to even fewer educational opportunities. One of the most troubling changes for me personally is the elimination of the required U.S. government and D.C. history courses to graduate. While I'm in favor of flexibility and choice for our students, there's plenty of space for them to make those choices in their electives in the typical current high school schedule. Currently, they take 32 courses. You don't have that many to graduate. If a student passes all their courses, then they'll be able to take a wide array of electives. The problem instead is the resourcing we have to offer said electives. We don't have that many choices for them because we don't have the money and the staffing to do so. Just as a final note, I do support the resolution before us to call for an independent investigation. I think that will aid in the oversight and accountability and checks and balances in the system, and we need to start moving outside of mayoral control to start looking at what is going on inside our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative. You will leave a copy with us, right? Thank you. Next on our agenda is consideration of ceremonial resolutions. We will consider all three of the resolutions and then take a short recess to allow for presentation of the resolution to the honorees. We will begin with a resolution honoring the Martin Luther King Parade Committee. I'm going to turn to Mr. Batchelor, Ward 8 representative, to make a motion on the resolution.
So moved, Madam President.
Is there a second?
Second.
Having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Haywood, would you please read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education resolution to recognize the MLK Holiday Peace Walk and Parade Committee, CR 17-9. Whereas the District of Columbia's Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Parade began in 1979, organized by radio talk show host and community activist Ralph Waldo P.D. Green Jr., Washington and former publisher and philanthropist Dr. Calvin R. Rolark, and former Ward 8 council member Wilhelmina J. Rolark. Whereas the first parade took place 7 years before King's birthday would be first observed as a federal holiday, making it one of the oldest MLK Day celebrations in the country. Whereas for nearly 40 years, a committee of community leaders and local residents has worked to fund, organize, and carry out this citywide celebration. Whereas the committee has in recent years expanded the celebration, including the addition of a peace walk, health fair, prayer breakfast, and other programming. Whereas the committee has gone above and beyond to enrich and showcase the talent of students across the district by including school bands, hosting an essay contest, awarding scholarships, and providing surface hours to student volunteers. And whereas the annual Martin Luther King Jr. holiday celebrations in the District of Columbia have become an invaluable part of our city's history and culture and an indispensable source of enrichment for our city's youth. Now therefore be it resolved that the State Board of Education recognizes and thanks the 2018 Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Peace Walk and Parade Committee for their contributions to the District of Columbia and the preservation of a celebration that is deeply meaningful to our city and to the nation.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the resolution?
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Vice.
Just very briefly, I want to thank my colleagues for taking the time to pause and really recognize some of the hardworking folks in our community who are not just organizing a parade and celebration, but even through my experience have worked overtime to make it a meaningful experience for our students and other youth across our community. There is a essay contest that's a part of this year's celebration for anybody in the room or watching. The deadline is this Friday, so please submit. And there's a prize for students, and it's just really great to have a celebration that's so deeply meaningful to our city, really go above and beyond to include our students and showcase their talents. And I look forward to, as many of you do, joining them next month on Martin Luther King Avenue for this celebration. So thank you to my colleagues and thank you to the committee, and we look forward to recognizing you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelor. Is there additional discussion? Seeing none, I would like to call the question. The motion is on approval of State Board Ceremonial Resolution 17-9. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is approved. Next on our agenda is a resolution recognizing the hard work of a student athlete, Changa Anderson. I would like to turn to our Ward 4 representative, Dr. Woodward, to make the motion.
I move the ceremony resolution to the floor.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Haywood, would you please read the resolution into the record?
Ceremonial resolution honoring Changamire Anderson II on his selection to the United States National Gymnastics Team, CR 17-10. Whereas Changamire Changa Anderson II represented the United States as a member of the United States National Gymnastics Team, competing at the World Trampoline Championships in Bulgaria on November 12, 2017. Whereas Mr. Anderson was the first youth athlete from the District of Columbia to compete in the World Trampoline Championships and was the only African-American male member of the United States double mini trampoline team. Whereas Mr. Anderson has trained in trampoline jumping since he was 4 years old. Whereas Mr. Anderson is a student athlete who maintains a strong academic record at Alice Deal Middle School while pursuing an intense training regimen. And whereas Mr. Anderson is an inspiration to student athletes across the district who strive every day to be the best they can be on the field and in the classroom. Now therefore be it resolved that the State Board congratulates Changamire Anderson II on his athletic accomplishments and celebrates his participation in the World Trampoline Championships.
Thank you. Is there a discussion on the resolution?
I just want to say, from one former gymnast to another, congratulations.
Dr. Woodruff?
Yes, I would like to congratulate Changa for a job well done. I've had the opportunity to watch him practice, and I'm in awe. Congratulations.
I think all the board would like to. Why are you being shy? I think the entire board would like to congratulate you on your accomplishments. That is tremendous. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing, yeah. Seeing that, I would like to call the question. The motion is on approval of State Board Ceremonial Resolution 17-10. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Next on our agenda, you gotta laugh to keep from crying, right? Next on our agenda is consideration of a ceremonial resolution honoring the 2017 DCIAA and DCSAA champion football team from Frank W. Ballou, my alma mater. I'm going to turn to Mr. Batchelor, Ward 8 representative again, to make the motion on the resolution.
Madam President, so moved.
Is there a second? Haven't been properly moved and seconded. Mr. Haywood, would you please read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education resolution to recognize the 2017 Ballou Senior High School football team, CR 17-11. Whereas on December 2nd, 2017, the Frank W. Ballou Senior High School football team became the 2017 DC State Athletic Association Class AA champions in a 39-28 victory over Friendship Collegiate Public Charter School. Whereas this victory represents the school's first state football title in its first ever championship appearance. Whereas Ballou also claimed victory over H.D. Woodson High School at the DC Interscholastic Athletic Association Turkey Bowl on November 23rd with a score of 21-14. And whereas the Ballou Knights have exemplified the qualities of excellent student athletes and have brought pride to their community through their hard work and accomplishments. Now therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education recognizes and congratulates the dedication and hard work of the student athletes and faculty of the Frank W. Ballou Senior High School football team this year.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the resolution?
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Batchelor.
One, I'm glad to have so many members of our Ballou Knight family here in the chambers this evening, and we look forward to to meeting them and congratulating them in person a little later in the meeting. But what I want to say is undoubtedly, and even as recently as this week, this has been a difficult year for Ballou. But what has inspired me, and I think what has inspired the Ward 8 community, is the perseverance of all of its students, but that perseverance expressed through their excellent student athletes on the football team. The team, one, brought a whole lot of victories home, but even if they didn't, they played their games with heart, they played their games with class, with the utmost amount of sportsmanship, and they showed and they expressed what's best about our students and our young people in Ward 8. And so I think this is the very, very least we can do to show them how much we are proud of them. And on behalf of a proud Ward 8 community, which is 80,000 residents strong, we're glad that you brought that home to us this year. And it goes without saying that we know you'll bring it back next year. So thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleagues on the board.
Is there any additional discussion? Seeing, Tatiana.
I just wanted to say thank you to the football team for joining us, and especially as a Ballou Knight, I wanted to congratulate you on your victory, despite any obstacles that may have been happening in the building, especially with you guys being some of the top academic performers in the building. So just congratulations, and thank you for making our community proud.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none. Oh, you?
We have to vote first.
I was getting ready to do that. Seeing none, I would like to call the question. The motion is on approval of State Board Ceremonial Resolution 17-11. All in favor?
Roll call, Madam President.
Aye.
Aye.
Roll call. Roll call. All opposed? The motion is approved. We will now take a 5-minute recess, and we ask Mr. Anderson, the representatives from Ballou, and the representative from the Martin Luther King Parade join us here in the well. We'll meet you down there. The board is in recess.
Yeah, if you guys can scrunch together as much as possible, that would be great.
Or maybe some down here. Are we doing separate, or are we doing one? Paul, are we doing 3 separate, or are we doing one?
I think we're going to do all one.
I think we should do 3 separate.
I agree with her.
Let's do 3 separate.
Okay, so we'll do the Blue guys first. Do the football champions first, okay? So everybody in the football picture, please stay here. Everyone else, move off to the side, and we'll do yours in a second.
Here we go.
All right, that's fine. Fill in on each side. Yeah.
Marcus, can you get over?
Yeah, all the board members, please get in the picture.
There we go.
Go Knights.
Can we do MLK committee next?
All representatives for the MLK committee. MLK committee, we'll do your picture now. Oh, okay.
I have a test card.
Are you, Karen, you want to get in the picture?
Mark?
Mark, can you guys, yeah, all scrunch in, please. All right. All right, you guys want to raise it up?
We can also do one with the whole family. Okay, one with him, yeah. Me and mine. Why don't you go up first? That's easier.
No.
Thank you so much. Yeah, of course. Do you wanna go up now? We'll get one with the board first. Yeah. You all look so much more photogenic without me in there. My stand-in is there, so that's good. I like it.
All right. Now
Can we do it with the family real quick?
Billy, do you want to get in here? I have one picture. Do you want to talk?
Can you unlock the phone? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic.
You ready? Everybody ready? Marcus? Sorry, I just saw you looking away. I feel like everyone's been calling your name.
let's do one more.
I guess so.
Mark and Karen, one more,
Come back, come back, come back.
I got a good one. You did.
I got a bunch too. I don't know.
All right.
Did you get one?
Yep.
Wait, sorry, one last one. Don't move, don't move. Come back, come back, come back, come back, come back. Ooh, pardon me. Last one. 2 minutes. Karen, you ready? We ready? Okay.
All right.
Wait. No.
Great.
They're on Changa's family. So tell them, you want me to just text you?
Don't listen to us. Did you start the interview?
The meeting will be called, the meeting will come to order. It is no secret achievement and opportunity gaps in our schools line up closely with our racial and social economic divisions. Poor students of color are not receiving the same education as their white counterparts. When reporting data on students, schools across the country typically use the eligibility guidelines for free and reduced price meals, which is at an income level less than or equal to 185% of federal poverty guidelines. In the district, 70% of our schools are considered to be community eligible, and therefore the entire student population is reported as economically disadvantaged. This results in data that is not detailed enough to show the performance of students facing the biggest barriers to educational success. I would like to turn to Mrs. Wattenberg, representative to Ward 3, to make a motion on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We've discussed this before, and
No, you're not moved.
oh, I'm so moved. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there? Having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Haywood, would you read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education Resolution 17-12, redefining the definition of economically disadvantaged students. Whereas affirming the integrity of achievement data and monitoring the progress of the most vulnerable students are two vital roles of state boards of education across the country. Whereas the District of Columbia Office of the State Superintendent for Education currently, and in accordance with federal law, reports subgroup test scores for economically disadvantaged students in order that their achievement and growth can be tracked by schools, parents, policymakers, and other community members. Whereas, like other state education agencies, OSSE uses a definition of economically disadvantaged that is based on students' eligibility for free or reduced price lunch under the income eligibility guidelines set forth by the federal government. Whereas eligibility for free or reduced price lunch was originally based strictly on family income, and any student whose family earned an income less than roughly 185% of federal poverty guidelines was eligible. Whereas for over 5 years, in keeping with federal rules designed to reduce administrative costs and stigma, OSSI has designated many schools as community eligible. Whereas under the rules that define schools as community eligible or near eligible, up to 70% of the students at such schools need not meet the income requirements for free and reduced price lunch, severely weakening the correlation between free and reduced priced meal eligible students and economically disadvantaged students. Whereas currently in DC, 162 out of 231 schools are community eligible, and therefore all of the students at these schools are considered economically disadvantaged for the purposes of reporting test scores. Whereas test scores reported for the economically disadvantaged category therefore reflect the scores of a much more economically diverse group than was originally intended, and that parents, policymakers, and community members are consequently deprived of accurate information on the achievement of economically disadvantaged students. Whereas the federal Every Student Succeeds Act requires OSSI to report scores for economically disadvantaged students, but allows OSSI to determine that definition. Whereas OSSI already collects student-level data on eligibility for the Federal Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and homeless foster care status in order to determine that the amount of each school's at-risk payment in accordance with district law. Whereas in some cases, OSSI already reports the test score data for the at-risk subgroup, which includes the subgroups previously named, as well as high school students who are 2 or more grade levels behind. Whereas the State Board believes that the current method of consolidated reporting is misleading and that students' eligibility for TANF and SNAP and their homeless foster care status is a more appropriate definition of economically disadvantaged. Whereas the monthly income threshold for temporary assistance to needy families eligibility is substantially lower than the monthly income threshold eligibility for supplemental nutrition assistance program. Whereas the needs and achievement of a most economically disadvantaged group of students may be substantially different from those who are designated economically disadvantaged solely because of their SNAP status. And whereas the State Board believes it is important for the district's various education institutions, leaders, and families to be aware of and monitor the achievement and progress of this most economically disadvantaged group of students. Now therefore be it resolved that the State Board of Education calls on the State Superintendent to change the definition of economically disadvantaged status to include only those students who are defined as at risk based on their SNAP or TANF eligibility or their status as homeless or in foster care. Be it further resolved that the State Board of Education calls on the State Superintendent to adopt this new definition when reporting economically disadvantaged student subgroup test scores, and that she do so prior to the release of PARCC scores for the 2017-2018 school year. Be it further resolved that the State Board of Education calls on the State Superintendent to report test scores for a new subgroup named Most Economically Disadvantaged that includes only students from families eligible for TANF or from homeless and foster care families, and to do so prior to the release of PARCC scores for the 2017-2018 school year. Be it further resolved that the State Board of Education calls on the State Superintendent to use these definitions in any OSSI reports on educational quality, achievement, progress, programs, etc., and to do so no later than the start of the 2018-2019 school year. Be it further resolved that the State Board calls on the State Superintendent to revise and reissue the score reports for PARCC and DC CAS, incorporating the new definitions for economically disadvantaged and most economically disadvantaged, retroactive to school year 2011-2012, the year before the introduction of the free and reduced price lunch community eligibility option was introduced. Be it finally resolved that the State Board directs its staff to work with OSSI, the Deputy Mayor of Education, and the Council of the District of Columbia to enact this change in reporting.
Thank you, Mr. Haywood. Discussion on the resolution is now open, but without objection from the board, I would like to provide Superintendent Kind with the opportunity to speak on the subject. Any objection?
Thank you, President Williams. State Board members, as you begin to consider a resolution around the State Board's opinion on the district's federally approved definition of economic disadvantage, I wanted to give some context on the current definition and OSSI's process moving forward. The economic disadvantage category is a definition used for federal reporting. The Every Student Succeeds Act and previous iterations of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act require states to annually report various data points for the economically disadvantaged subgroup. SL also allows states to create their own definition for economically disadvantaged. Historically, DC and most states have used eligibility for free and reduced price meals as that definition. Free and reduced price meals began as a federal program under the U.S. Department of Agriculture to subsidize the cost of meals for students from low-income backgrounds to ensure they were able to access meals during the school day at no or low cost. Although it originated as a way to help students access meals, the definition of free and reduced price meals became a widely accepted standard for economic disadvantage in education data and research at state and national levels, in state education agencies, research organizations, and elsewhere. Free and reduced priced meals served as an effective proxy for economic disadvantage because eligibility was determined each year based on family income, and there was an established process used by schools, LEAs, and SEAs each year. However, in recent years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture developed an alternative way to administer the free and reduced price meals program in high poverty areas to reduce burden and help more students access meals. This alternative is the community eligibility provision. It essentially means all students at a school with an eligible student population over a certain threshold are then considered eligible for free and reduced price meals. This change was a step forward for the programmatic goals for student nutrition programs, but made the free and reduced price metric less precise and less of a good fit as a proxy for transparent reporting on economic disadvantage. OSSI, along with many other states, has been aware of this issue and has been considering changing the DC state definition. We anticipate a change in the definition to something similar to the at-risk funding definition and plan to implement the change in data reporting for the 2017-18 school year. The details, business rules, and engagement have not yet been completed, but we look forward to bringing future updates to the board and continuing this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? You? Laura.
If I could ask Superintendent Kang, I don't know if you can share this, but in this resolution, there's the thought shared that there's a distinction between economically disadvantaged and what is being called most economically disadvantaged. In your experience, both here and elsewhere, have you found any other state that is trying to distinguish between the two and any value add from doing so?
I'm not aware of any other state that has made that distinction. I think that I understand conceptually where the idea is coming from, but my understanding is that first, it would create a number of operational challenges for both schools and for OSSI. And second, that I think it would lead to quite a bit of data suppression, and I'm not sure that it would actually yield useful information, that as we try and parse further, it would cause some issues in terms of what is actually reportable data. And then third, I think what we've seen is that because both TANF and SNAP are benefits programs, that eligibility can change over time, and sort of the rules in terms of having the at-risk category as it's currently defined with multiple ways that students can be eligible creates a little bit more stability in that category as opposed to parsing the different subcategories within it.
Can you explain further what you meant by data suppression? Any specific example?
Certainly. So for example, as you know, we take student data privacy and confidentiality very seriously, and so we suppress fields when they are below a certain minimum N size. We currently typically use the N size of 10. But once you get into smaller subcategories, we also use something called complementary suppression or secondary suppression. So for example, if I had a total of 11 students, but 10 of them were in one category, and yet, or let's say 6 and 5, right? This is a terrible example off the top of my head. Let me try, let's say there were 17 total students. If I showed 11 students in one field, but a total of 17, you would know that there were necessarily 6 in the other. So you end up having to suppress the whole row because the total breakdown is smaller. And so we've seen, for example, that if you try and report race and ethnicity by grade, by school, that the fields get so small that you end up seeing N of less than 10 in every cell across a whole spreadsheet. And so I think that we have learned that while I think often there's good intentions behind the different cuts of data that we want to see, the more that you add, the more that we see, you don't always get actually meaningful information. But there's actually a lot of work that goes into the background because you calculate everything, then you suppress, and then it becomes public, and there's not actually meaningful information there.
Thank you. Ruth, can you speak to why you are proposing both gradations?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say, well, thanks for that feedback, and I look forward to maybe further talking about some of this as you work it out. I'm glad that after these years, we're going to have a way of looking at this more precisely and minimally not having the middle-class students in the economically disadvantaged data. But I think it's very important to pull out the students who are homeless, foster, and on TANF in a separate category. And let me say a couple of things about it. First of all, no other state is able to do that because no other state, to my knowledge, already monitors all this data in the way that we do with at-risk students. So we're in a position to monitor and track this and report on it and learn from it in a way that no other state is able to do. And I think it's a great opportunity both for us to really identify the programs that are working here for different groups of students and to really enrich the understanding of this around the country, as others are not able to do it in the same way. I do think that a huge number of our students are in this, even in the new at-risk category or on TANF and SNAP. You would know the number better than me. And I think it makes a lot of sense to subdivide it. This is not, sadly, a place where there's only 10% or 20% of our students who are on SNAP or TANF, and so we can make a blanket statement about that whole group. Both groups are quite large, and they may be quite different in their educational needs and in their educational progress, and it makes total sense to me to look at them separately and be able to see how we're doing with both groups and think about what kinds of things we could do better. As to the suppression issue, let me say I absolutely agree that just as in every other subgroup, we have rules that say you can't report it out if it's less than, I forget what the number is, 15 students, whatever the number is, 10 students. And I certainly think that we should use the same rules of suppression for this for all the same reasons. And if that means we can't report it out on a grade-by-grade basis because the numbers are too small, absolutely we can suppress it at that level. But I can't think of any reason why at the school level we can't have a clear sense of how the different subgroups, these newly differentiated subgroups are doing, and I think it would really help us in our school reform work.
Ms. Wattenberg, could you explain to me how you would differentiate between, your terminology of economically disadvantaged and most economically disadvantaged? How would you?
Yeah, it seems, it may be law, it's in the resolved, although it doesn't seem to have made it into the body of the whereases. The difference would be as follows. Economically disadvantaged students would be those students who are on SNAP, who are on TANF, and who are homeless and who are foster care. In effect, it's basically the same group of students who long ago were the students who would have gotten a free and reduced lunch. It effectively makes that category, returns the integrity to that category. The most disadvantaged category would be just those students who are on TANF, whose families are on TANF, and who are themselves either foster children or homeless.
So I'm still a little confused. So you have to be homeless and on TANF to be most economic?
No. It's the distinction between the larger group, which is so the disadvantaged group is students who are on SNAP, food stamps, the students who are on TANF, homeless and foster. Most disadvantaged would not include students who are on SNAP, because the economic threshold for that is probably 3 or 4 times the threshold for students from TANF households. Those are very, very different families with very, very different needs, and we want to be able to look at them separately.
Thank you. Mr. Batsman?
Just as a point of clarification, in terms of, so I think I've heard 2 different kind of definitions. So in terms of SNAP and TANF, are we talking about, so I know here throughout it says SNAP and TANF eligibility, but are we talking about students who are already on SNAP and TANF rolls currently? Okay, thank you.
Ms.
If we can do one. I just like to say, I'm not sure these are the right definitions, and I'm looking forward to working with OSSI to figure out what the right ones are, and with the potential to actually show some modeling to find out how much data suppression really is an issue. But the reason why I think this is really important is I think we don't know a lot about how income level actually influences outcomes for students in a nuanced way. And I'd say that's generally true across the country, where we have a very broad threshold of eligibility where we would consider reportable a student or family who is economically disadvantaged. And so when we're choosing interventions, we don't know whether the intervention is truly right for everybody, or is it more effective and more important to make the intervention available for the students who are truly most at risk. And so I do see a lot of utility in having this kind of information disaggregated to the extent that it can be, because of what we'll learn from it, and the way that we could promote policies based on equity associated with the information that comes from reporting out in that way. I think there's a lot of value to thinking about carefully the kind of information we want, and how it can really be helpful for advancing the needs of students and their families. So again, I support the spirit of this 100%. I'm not exactly sure these are the specific right things, but I look forward to working with OSSI on that.
Okay, any other questions?
I'll make one other comment, which is the other way in which it's useful is, you know, we rate our schools, and there is a tendency, and this goes across all schools, there's a tendency to think that high scores mean a great school. In fact, sometimes high scores just mean the students who enrolled in the school are higher income and more privileged, and this is a way to break that out at the lower levels. Laura, would you be interested in a whereas or be it further resolved that indicates a willingness to further consider categories? I mean, I think it's important to get this on the record. I think it's that we want this, and as the superintendent works through the business rules, I think it's great that we work with them. I don't want to hold up.
I have full confidence that we will be working with them and that it's a consultative practice, so I don't see any further need to edit the resolution personally.
Okay.
Any other questions, discussion? Seeing none, the motion on adoption of Resolution 17-12 is on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Or do you want a roll call? All opposed? The motion is approved.
Should we do a roll call and just show that it's unanimous? No.
In late November, a joint report from the Washington WAMU and our local NBC affiliate alleged that the staff of Ballou Senior High School had allowed or forced teachers to alter grades or attendance data in order to ensure 100% college acceptance rate. Last Friday, the Council Committee on Education held what is hoped to be the first hearing related to these reports. I want to provide some context for this problem. A graduation rate does not and cannot serve as a measure of student achievement. Graduation rates above 70% make no sense when our proficiency rate is 40. While we have made strides in education reform in the district, we are still failing students. The issues at Ballou are systemic and are detracting from our school's fundamental mission, the education of every one of our children. Tonight, the State Board will consider a resolution that calls for a system-wide, thorough, and independent investigation of the awarding of credit in district schools. I move the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Haywood, would you please read the resolution into record?
State Board of Education resolution calling for an independent investigation into data and accountability practices in district schools and the creation of an independent research commission, SR 17-13. Whereas on November 28, 2017, WAMU reported that many Ballou High School seniors in the class of 2017 were granted diplomas despite having missed weeks and sometimes months of school, that grading policies prevented teachers from issuing deserved grades, that teachers faced pressure to inflate grades and pass students despite absences and/or failure to complete assignments, that students were placed against policy into less rigorous credit recovery classes, and that teachers who resisted these practices faced retaliation. Whereas educating our children and preparing them for college or careers is a paramount priority of our city, and that failing to do so is harmful and unacceptable. Whereas there are allegations suggesting that these alleged practices are not confined to Ballou High School, but exist in other schools across the district as well. Whereas on June 2nd, 2017, the Washington Post reported on the unprecedented level of mid-year teacher resignations at Ballou, and on July 17, 2017, the Post reported that District of Columbia Public Schools claims of a dramatic reduction in suspension rates were based on potentially fraudulent data, and the Post reported that they were unable to investigate public charter schools in the same way as DCPS schools because public charter schools are not covered under the district's Freedom of Information Act. Whereas given the SBOE's responsibility for approving high school graduation requirements, the metrics used to judge school quality, including graduation rates and attendance rules, SBOE has a special responsibility to understand how these and other requirements are being implemented and whether these standards are being met legitimately. Whereas the State Board supports Mayor Bowser's order to the State Superintendent to undertake an investigation into the allegations because it is important our students are confident in the legitimacy of the degrees they have been granted. And whereas the SBOE also believes that the internal investigation is insufficient because those responsible for the investigation report to the same structure they are investigating, which could lead to conflicts of interest. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education recommends that the Council of the District of Columbia A, requests that the DC Auditor commission an independent review of the criteria and standards that underlie high school graduation across the city, including the role of credit recovery, grading policy, attendance, discipline and suspension policies, pressure on teachers to raise grades and/or pass students, and allegations of retaliation against teachers who fail to act on that pressure. And B, dedicate funding in the fiscal year 2019 budget process to independently examine the institutional conditions and culture that has allegedly created an education system that prioritizes appearances and outcomes data over genuine improvement.
Discussion on the resolution is now open. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Wattenborough?
Yeah, I want to say a few things. I'm not going to review the charges that have been made. They've been in the paper, and the resolution, as just read, includes them. Let me say, these are serious charges. Speaking for myself, there is nothing in these charges that I haven't heard before many times, and I've heard them not just about Ballou. Teachers and residents testified before us this summer raising these same issues. I've heard them at state board meetings, at community meetings, and in informal conversations with teachers, principals, students, and advocates all over the city. They are not new, they are open secrets, and they go unaddressed until the media forces them out into the open. And to be absolutely clear, they are not indictments of our students who did what students have done for eons, myself included, figure out the easiest way to pass and graduate. That's why we have graduation standards. It's why boards like this set graduation standards and why leaders of schools and districts enforce them. The mayor has rightly asked both the chancellor and state superintendent to investigate, but only internal investigations conducted by or under the auspices of mayoral appointees are insufficient. Just ask our neighbors in Prince George's County. This resolution calls for an independent review to be undertaken by and reporting to an entity outside of the mayor's chain of command. This in no way suggests any ill purpose on the part of the mayor or her staff. It is meant to assure healthy checks and balances, a mainstay of democratic government taught in 8th grade social studies in our DC standards. The resolution also calls for plenty of public input and a steering committee of stakeholders from both sectors with a wide range of views and experiences. As an eminent education researcher once said to me, if you want a good research project, make sure that all the folks with different viewpoints are at the table at the beginning as the research questions and parameters are developed. In this case, that would mean both those who think these charges are aberrant and those who believe these problems are systemic. If everyone gets their questions addressed, the end result will be research that is comprehensive and that is credible to all sides, which is something we desperately need. We also call for a review that goes beyond just attendance, to explore the pressure to inflate and change grades, the quality of credit recovery programs, and the connection between all of this and teacher evaluations. And we ask very specifically for a review that isn't limited to reviewing documents and policies. We want to know what happened and why. A narrowly focused document review in PG County made it more difficult for them to get to the bottom of what's happened, and they're still struggling with it. Finally, this is not about Ballou. It's not just about Ballou. It's not just about DCPS, and it's not just about attendance. We are well aware that this Board of Ed has little authority compared to those in other states or to local school boards in almost every other city, town, or county in the country, but we do have the authority and responsibility for approving high school graduation requirements and the criteria, including grad requirements, on which schools will be rated. We have a responsibility to assure the integrity of these criteria and to understand what they actually reflect in practice. To carry out this role, we need the full independent review outlined in this resolution.
Thank you. Any other input, questions? Ms. Moore?
I'd like to make a motion to table.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we. All right, so take a roll call. No, 8 days. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Roll call, please.
It's me.
The motion is on tabling Resolution 17-13. Excuse me. Ms. Carter. Ms. Carter. Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
No, I approve the table motion.
Aye.
Ms. Wattenberg.
No.
Dr. Woodruff.
Aye.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Mr. Whedon.
No.
Mr. Batchelor.
No.
Ms. Rhodes.
No.
Ms. Robinson.
No.
Ms. Williams.
Aye.
Madam President, the motion to table is approved.
Now what? The motion is denied. Approved. Next, we go on to Administrative Committee. The Administrative Committee has recommended a revision to our policy related to how we conduct our public meetings. I would like to turn to Mr. Wheaton, Ward 6 representative, to make the motion and then begin the discussion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wheaton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the board works to finalize and approve our operating procedures, we felt the need to ensure that we had clear guidelines for our operations. The proposed policies outlined in the documents that all the board members have been provided is the draft that the administrative committee has approved, and we would like to move forward, and I know we expect one amendment that I'll make after any conversations about this.
Is there any additional discussion about the proposed?
Madam President.
Mr. Batchelor.
I want to thank Representatives Wheaton's committee for their diligence in addressing this issue. It's obviously something that I brought up and some members of our board brought up earlier in the year, and we've had robust discussions about them, and I'm glad that we're bringing this to a vote, and that hopefully we'll be opening a better form of dialogue with our constituents who join us at these meetings. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
As Marcus says, I also commend you guys for taking the time to put this together. I will say that I do have some issues with the especially the board members and the questioning of all public witnesses that appear before the board under any and all issues, especially issues. I do take issue with the fact that we would consider questioning the public on issues of matters that we have no control over or that are not under our authority. Because of that, I also do think that if this motion passes, that we should be diligent in that and make sure that we adhere to 3 minutes per each round of questions
Point of
for each
information
person.
for the body, point of information. Yes. I'll be moving in a moment a amendment that will allow the board to vote on that specific issue, so that whether or not we agree on the public questioning of witnesses to insert that language or not, we can vote to approve everything else. So I'll be moving language as soon as it's appropriate on the full thing. Before we had that detailed discussion, I wanted to make sure that we were able to have a conversation about the rest of the package.
Okay, perfect.
Any additional discussion about the rest of the policies presented by the administrative committee?
So seeing no other discussion, I want to move an amendment that would insert at an appropriate place the language that states, board members will have the opportunity to question all public witnesses that appear before the board upon request to the chair. Each board member will have 3 minutes per round of questions of public witnesses. At the discretion of the chair, multiple rounds of questions may be permitted.
Second.
Question, please.
Yeah.
So,
We would need a second to have this on the
Second.
floor.
second.
Okay.
Can you, so if I'm understanding you correctly, your amendment, we don't have this in a written form, is that correct?
It's actually part of the policy that was submitted, so it doesn't actually need an amendment. This section was actually included on the end,
Yeah, it's on there.
so it does not need an amendment.
That's what,
Okay.
that's what,
I didn't see
I think
it.
it's
that's
the
really
last
correct.
paragraph on the
Right,
back.
it's the last paragraph of the materials that were sent to the board.
Oh, okay.
So are you asking to strike this last paragraph and vote on everything else for right now? And then come back and vote
Sorry,
to a second
I
vote?
was under the impression that we were going to have an amendment to add or vote on that language and then move the whole thing forward. So I'll withdraw my motion, and I know that this language has been a point of contention among the board. So we've moved it forward with that language included, and if there is a discussion or conversation about it, that would be something that we would need to act upon before we pass the full package. Sorry, I thought we were doing it the other way.
Okay. That's why I said, when you read that, I said, it's right here. Wait. Okay. So, Ms. Carter, you finished your, any other discussion on that or any other part of the package?
Yes, Joe, would you consider a friendly amendment? Right now, the chair has the sole discretion to approve or not approve the opportunity to question, is that correct?
In this, yeah.
The way it's written, yes.
Yes. Is there a reason to do it that way rather than to take a vote if we want to suspend the rules? Why are we trying to make this the status quo rather than a vote for suspension of the rules in order to allow for questioning of the witnesses?
Madam President, as a matter of inquiry, so the policy is not in our bylaws, so we don't have a suspension of the rules ability technically to do this, even though that has been our practice. So this would clarify what the policy is, so we would be able to suspend this rule because it would be a rule of the board. Bylaws, this ability to question witnesses is not in our bylaws currently.
But we wouldn't need to suspend this rule in order to ask questions. There would have to be a rule that says you can never ask a question, then we would suspend that rule. Right? So this leads the default option to allow us to be asking questions at all times. And is that your desire?
That is the language that the administrative committee has put forward.
Any other discussion?
Well, I do wonder if you would accept a friendly amendment that it would include something along the lines of, instead of saying upon the request of the chair, it would and at the discretion of the chair, it could be at the discretion of the board, right? So that others are able to weigh in on whether that seems to be the best use of our time in a particular moment.
Point of information. Ms. Wilson-Phelan, in terms of your amendment, so are you saying that hypothetically, if a member wanted to ask a question to a public witness who came, that the entire board would have to pass a motion for that one member to ask a question?
What I'm suggesting is that it's not one member only. This allows any member, all of us, to ask a series of questions of any public witness. What I'm asking is that the board weigh in on that when we decide we want to do that. Right? So if we want to open that process up for everybody to have an opportunity, then let's make a decision that we as a board want to do that each time.
That's what I hear her saying is rather than the one person having the authority to make that decision, the entire board makes that decision, whether or not we want to question specific panels.
So as a point of clarification, the language that's currently on the floor would not necessarily make questioning public witnesses a standard procedure, but would make question of witnesses possible through the consent of the chair.
This one says of the chair. She's suggesting that we change it to the consent of the board.
Question?
Yes, ma'am. Ms.
I'm
Waterbury.
sorry, the way I read this and my understanding of the administrative committee's intent was different. This says the board members will have the opportunity to question all public witnesses that appear before the board upon request of the chair. That is, I request of the chair that I have the right to ask, that I ask a question. It's not giving the chair the ability to tell me no. That's how I read this policy. And that is my understanding of the intent of the policy, because the intent is that part of our time, part of our reason for being here is to hear from people. We are the only public body, we're the only democratically elected body that deals entirely with education, and people want to come here and ask questions, give us comments, give us testimony, and if we have questions, we should ask them. That's our obligation and our responsibility, and it shouldn't require a lot of rigmarole to make that happen. That's my view.
My view is that's all well and good, potentially with this set of board members, and I also have seen people take advantage of that situation for political gain. And I think that it should be, the board members should have discretion associated with how that question period is used.
I'll just know there is a 3-minute limit per round, and that is what the administrative committee put in there to make sure that that wouldn't happen. So that's my response to that.
My response to that would be we have seen in the past that board members have taken advantage of that time, have not used it wisely, and it has not been used. It's been over time, many, many times, leading to problems with long meetings. Also, it is a burden on our staff. That is, if this motion passes, and if we choose not to table it tonight, I would expect a strict adherence to that rule.
Madam President?
Yes.
I'll just say in closing that as much as I hold my colleagues in high esteem, as much as I hold my colleagues in high esteem, this is not necessarily about how any of our colleagues feel about the time we're spending or about how our colleagues feel about the line of questioning. Our responsibility in these public meetings is to the public. And so while I understand that for some folks, some line of questioning and some topics of discussion seemed irrelevant or seemed frustrating or seemed like it was for political gain, those discretions or those judgments are solely in the opinion of the public. And while we are a body, we are independent. We are members elected by our constituents, and when they come to this table to speak to us, they deserve to hear our voices back. And I think they expect for us to inquire about the very serious issues that they bring to us. Some off topic, yes. Some out of our purview, yes. But every person who approaches this table, who has elected us to serve in their government, deserves their government to speak back. And so, for us to be debating this, I think it's well and fine. But our first allegiance and our first concern would be to the people who sit at this table before us, because they're the most important people in this room. Thank you.
All right, I call the question. Roll call. So now we're going to a vote.
Roll call,
All in
Madam
favor?
President. Roll call.
Roll call. Okay, roll call.
Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams. Mr. Jacobson is absent. Ms. Carter.
Nay.
Ms. Wilson Phelan.
Aye.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Aye.
Dr. Woodruff.
Aye.
Mr. Jones. Aye. Mr. Whedon.
Aye.
Mr. Batchelor.
Aye.
Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Robinson. Ms. Robinson.
Just say
Abstain.
Absolutely. Madam President, the motion passes.
Okay, I lost my script. All right. The motion is approved. The State Board of Education was created in the Public Education Reform Act of 2007. In some ways, a successor to the old Board of Education. The State Board is the only independent education agency in the District of Columbia. The people directly elect our members just as they elect the Council of the District of Columbia. Our focus has always been providing a way for all district residents to participate in the development of an education system that truly serves every student. I want to thank the staff and fellows of the State Board for their hard work and dedication to ensuring our mission and in preparation of this report. I would like to make a motion to adopt the report. Somebody?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the report? The State Board of Education 10-year report, is there any discussion on it? Everybody's still back 5 minutes ago, right? Okay.
I would just like to say that I'm really proud and impressed of the work that we've done this year.
I think it's anybody else before? I think it's great to have our first 10 years of existence documented in such a great way. We are steadily growing as a board and finding our place in the educational landscape, and I hope that we will continue to work together to improve the educational outcomes for the students of the District of Columbia. What? Okay, so if there are seeing no objections, I'd like to call the question. The motion is on adoption of the 10 years of State Board report. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The report is adopted. With no further business before the board, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? This is I will now adjourn the public meeting of the State Board of Education for December 20th, 2017, and wish everyone a very happy holiday season.
Happy holidays.
See you next year.